So the camera is
Dead
under
center, I
the
see that.
cabinets.
Right.
So this is what you'll see.
Okay.
And that's my only fear with, if you have somebody, like you almost need somebody to monitor the chat.
Yeah.
Or somebody
Like
who's
you do
willing
Bob
to, oh, I don't do that for Bob Baker.
Oh, you don't? Okay, who does?
I set it up, but I
It has to be replaced with like kind. That's the thing. You
sits right here. He doesn't usually move, so he'll,
like.
and there's only like 4 people who are
Yeah, they can't
on it, so somebody usually just like.
Or whatever.
So Hero Phantom
Grand,
That's
it's
where you-
Toto,
and all
you know, which is your higher end.
Yeah, because I
Then it
actually,
needs to be replaced with that.
you know, I told you what I did this weekend.
Not just whatever they can get at Home Depot.
I wasn't wearing earplugs. I should have.
Did you go swimming?
Huh? No, skill sauce.
Oh, dear. Yeah, that's like a rock
And
concert.
did you want this, or you just planning on
Is
using?
that the same height as this?
This one's a little bit taller.
I would love to have the top piece in there. Yeah.
Well, and it's, and it's a bigger deal right now because prices are so hard to get. Your buyers.
Okay, so that's going.
Get to the fridge and get it for 9 months.
Yeah, the Zoom
That's a big
screen
deal.
is small there.
It is.
So,
Oh, it's tiny.
And that's, and as people come on, it'll,
You want to go, I mean,
you can
Cynthia.
probably install it
I
yourself.
don't like this, I don't mind seeing it through you slide, like
Yeah.
it's rehearsal mode, like normal screen.
Oh, I'm just gonna do this for my introduction.
I know,
My
but I'm-
introduction.
That's not bad.
See,
That's decent.
But does that, do you find that distracting so I can see the next slide up?
No, no,
I can't read my notes on this screen. but
you've got
yeah.
so much to deliver. That's fine.
Okay.
You don't know of another view that makes architectural styles big.
I already looked.
So leaves that straight.
No, I already looked on that, on mine, see if I could do it, because on my laptop, when I do it, I can see my notes and y'all can't, but I can't find a way on yours to make that happen, so I'm fine. I did add 2 more houses that were in Sunday's paper.
They were in Sunday's paper.
Yes.
Who puts houses in papers? What kind were
One
they?
was Reed's paper still, so. One was a competitor, but it's 12,000 square feet in Highland Park
Nice.
for 12.5 million.
What style is it?
French classical, but because of the price point, I wanted
It's
to
only
add it.
$1,000 a square foot.
Yeah, 1,000 square foot today. They'll get it.
Yes, they will.
Well, I know who this, I don't know who the listing agent is, they'll get it. And then also one.
I would go to that a little bit.
Now,
Find
it's
out.
that's when you
If
use
they were selling it.
luxury papers that they do, you know, luxury houses that they
So
do.
you know that number because.
I thought it was a
they-
joke.
Buyers are
I went to the
happy
website.
and they still.
Well, that house also shows up on another website.
No, they always leave it up to them.
I mentioned
I can't make
ugliest
this
houses
for
in
you.
Texas.
I'll go to the mat if you want me to.
It's one of the 16 ugliest houses in Texas.
It's in South Lake.
But it is a classic chateau.
30 in fridge and
And
that's.
somebody thinks it's ugly.
6 million.
So it is worth
It has like
fighting
7
for, trying
towers.
to get
Oh, dear.
retained whether it's
When you see it, it's kind of like somebody.
that.
Somebody.
That's list a house
spent
tomorrow where they were their.
Do you remember the house, the Dow tile house?
You know, they were listing it with the old black.
I can't see
So
the
it's worth right now. So,
I,
even in your
I've seen
regular
house bounce every.
buyer deal, that's right.
13 was one number that they wanted.
Just because it's so.
And actually, when I was told at one point.
See if the
was
seller goes for it.
wife wanted it
Yeah.
back. Well, no, it's the other way around.
Crazy out there with.
He was, a son inherited. His wife hated it. They.
Well,
didn't sell it.
Marsh was a double O.
So they moved
Yeah,
back
I mean,
into it. Restored
right
it.
now,
And so
builders,
it's only
as soon as
been
they go-
sold privately.
They
You know, it got
get their permits back from the city.
Huh?
They would.
subdivided in levels of rubble.
No.
You didn't know that?
No.
I said.
Don't go look at it. I looked at the websites on Zillow and they removed 12,000
That's
square
what I try to
feet.
get it. They've seen, even if you.
Stack of rubble right now.
They're gonna. pay
And you know, it's 3.5 acres, so they subdivided it. They bought it for the lot value. And they
Most
fixed the listing, which was. at
Or have to go to
6.7.
secondary.
So you know, it's some number less than that.
Right.
And then they were going to divide it based on the view.
A lot of times,
The owner was gonna live on the.
towards the end of the deal, they're
Sell out
not taking
Other
it.
side.
They have to do a special plan.
Well, you know that family.
The water line.
Used
There's
to do it
a
also.
for that.
Really?
It was vacant.
I've actually had.
It's actually
flood,
three lots.
Refrigerator
My
out.
father built on 2 of them,
Didn't pay attention in the line.
left the third one.
House was,
Somebody
so
tried to sell it. I think it did so.
I would write in there too, if they, if you do lose this one and the furniture is getting removed.
Wish that I could see it on Zillow. It just broke my heart to look at a pile of rubble.
Well, you know, there were so many, I mean, that O'Neill Ford house, the Pinson house that was torn down on the corner of
When it's
St.
attached.
John's
It's like
and,
the laundry lines. You know, have you ever
St. John's and Armstrong.
had one taken out and then they left the line
Luke
hanging
Riley
outside instead
automobile.
of putting it
Again,
inside
that's
that little
car dealers.
Yeah.
hole? They just left it
So
on.
I don't understand how they have that much money, but they do.
Yeah, it's fine when they're attached.
You're right. They absolutely print money.
Well, you know, it's one of the same.
Come on in. Hello.
Well, that's why I'm in with the Sanders house. I did the house one up from the Sanders. We did it in Highland Park, and that's why I always loved that house. But then years later, I was actually
Right, yeah.
hired by.
And here's what I do.
Some work for them.
Well, a lot of times I just say, look, we disagree.
And those people.
Our brokers need. The broker.
How are they crazy?
Guarantee
Just, you know, it's just, I think that sometimes, and I've seen it with friends of mine
Probably
too.
usually get the
We're
deal.
sometimes raised with too much money. It's like that.
Yeah.
It's that story that came out of
That
working.
kind of threat. Like,
The
gosh,
economics teacher.
I don't think we're gonna come to an
What do you
agreement.
think the average American's income is? And the entire class answered
Discuss this. Our
six
broker knows good
figures.
and well that should stay.
And then one student actually said somewhere
So,
around.
I mean, you can say, we need to get with your broker, get with
His
your
father's
broker, and then.
And the average course in the US, everything
Hi.
is 45.
Hey, Julie. Come on up here. I want to introduce you. Sure. This is my niece, Julie Wakefield.
Okay.
I'm
Wakefield
sorry.
Smith.
I have to get used to
Hi, Julie.
This
Nice
is
to meet you.
Darren Tapscott. Julie is a lead at, she's a director of commercial at Keller Williams.
Cop-House.
Oh, wow.
And she's been, how long you been doing this?
I've been in commercial for over 20 years.
You know, assuming this is gonna be wherever that.
And you're still in the same-
And I'm still there.
know.
Yeah, yeah.
Also,
I've seen a lot. There's, I've been in several different roles, so, or,
because you know, you still have the power to walk away and they know.
So-
Congratulations. I mean,
thank you.
commercial real estate.
Buyers are feeling a little bit.
Interesting.
Good.
Because my practice, I used to do both,
Okay,
residential and commercial.
Then you can.
Okay.
And every now and then I still do
Repair.
a commercial
Hello.
project if I pass.
Come on in.
I don't.
It just, you know.
You're looking
well,
for-
we're gonna ask
After
for this.
doing 2 years for
because
the
you could
space
have-
planning, I don't want to do it.
right. No, that makes sense. Yeah. You can be a
Space
monster.
plan, 150,000 square feet in a weekend. No, I'm tired.
Yeah.
Better wait till Monday.
Don't blame you. Yeah.
Getting all set up.
Sally Bart's,
I think I have.
come on over here.
Familiar.
I know you too, I can't remember your name.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Cynthia.
Good to
Thanks
see
for
you.
coming.
Cynthia.
This is my niece Julie.
Hi,
Smith.
Julie. Ed
guys.
Morgan.
Nice to meet you.
I met you once, that's what it
I
was.
remember you.
Yeah.
See you.
Sally was a lead at Andrew Carnegie.
Oh.
For a year, 20 years, 20 plus years.
Yeah, it was a long time. I'm older than you.
And she's got a great attitude, but her husband Jim Bartz runs Extra Money, and that's a quick.
Yeah, so,
Lots and lots of realtors and
I made a mistake.
Very nice.
I'm
associated businesses.
Someone to.
I don't know.
He should be, he's coming, or else he's watching on one or the other. 'Cause
And this is Ed Morgan. Hi,
Nice
I'm my name is Jill Smith.
It's,
That's Julie said, hello, I'm gonna get it right.
yeah, Ed used to be in here all the time, and then he started working out of your home, I think. And now he's back today. He's
I'm
back.
back today for your
Good.
session.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
How's the jam?
It's good. I'm gonna go see if he's here.
How about, I'm here.
See if he's in my office. And I'm gonna run to their house. And I'm like, "That- There's my stuff. Don't let anybody take my
Oh,
stuff."
you should see the way I've written them every
Just give them
single.
credit.
I have to take advantage. There's lots of times I'm like, Melissa, what's my secret? Write this to the.
Oh, you look cute.
But yeah, I get to write.
It's like, oh, wow. Okay.
Power.
I haven't heard that name.
Well, when my husband woke up,
They go back on the market, it's gonna be.
I was like, well, let's get
I have to tell you funny, when my husband, he was practical joker, woke up for me to drive, the very first thing he said, and the nurses, he does, the nurses. The first thing he said was my cellar.
How you?
How are you? Good to see you.
It's been a while.
And I take that seriously. And so I said that when she threw it, I could see her feet underneath it, she hadn't left. And I actually, I didn't, it was so hard to get.
You're doing well.
You've been
Jokes. I
Very
don't
well,
know.
good, good.
And
So you've been working from home? Yeah, do that. Unfortunately, we're a narrow path.
That.
to get away with.
That's not one. No, it's not funny.
Bye.
Carol, how are you?
If you go to the left, it's I
Yours is my heart. Good to see you though. I have not seen you in so long. Are you still hanging out in Tyler? Are you still hanging out in Tyler?
How you doing?
Yeah.
Hey, Paula. Hey, Carol.
Did Jill tell you that she was speaking? No, I said.
She can, but she's not in her office for me to ask her.
Yeah, no, I'll just do a blurb and.
Have you seen her today? Jill? Yeah, she might. How are you, Deb?
I'm doing good.
Awesome.
It's time. Right.
How far of a drive is it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. They're toasty.
It's Fascia.
Don't hesitate to ask.
That's your cat.
Totally get it. I did the same thing, pretty much.
Yeah,
Some of these.
I'm still doing it.
yeah, me too. Well, there's.
I heard they were about
Still standing.
Oh, I know. Yeah, my business came in half last year.
So.
Last year was the worst year for me.
Different styles.
Well, it wasn't, my first year was the lowest, because last year was my second
So
lowest.
quick question.
Yes, ma'am.
No, this year was even lower than 20.
When he finishes. you
Oh, no,
want
wait,
to
no,
go-
2020 was only $3,000 lower than this.
What Carol was
Yeah.
going to. Okay,
Still.
good. We need to print the rest of it back.
He's gonna go through about how many styles of homes are you doing? How many styles of homes are you doing?
Glad to see you here.
I'm glad to be here.
Roughly 15.
Going back.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then he's, hey, Jim.
You said your cat?
Honestly, I haven't counted.
You're up to
Yeah,
4 cats.
I was-
18.
Okay, great.
This is who I wanted you to be. This is.
I
Jim.
think I got an offer, except I really do want the cat. And I talked a lot about the cat in my comments, I'm making the offer. But no, it turned me over and got it this weekend. But then when they accepted the offer, they said, no.
Do you have a practice?
I carried that kitten around.
It started out as
Once in a lifetime cats. That cat's gonna be so special.
Is that right?
There's some full times, they don't know where they're gonna go, what's gonna happen, but they're like, we're gonna pass that one, and we're gonna need the cash to buy another house. So the cat, they have to get rehomed, and so I think they were like, you'd be a good parent for my cat.
And you were showing the buyers.
I had to.
Maybe.
Maybe. I might be fostering.
That'd be great. So are you a real estate agent?
And I have to always.
So there's many tricks to getting your offer accepted.
You're good.
Doesn't change.
Yeah, this was the first contract. I normally write so many, and I'm so excited.
I've been super lucky this year so far that
Mark?
everybody that has wanted to buy has found a home, including just people looking for a lease. I usually have to tell about 5 or 6
I wanted
families
to
that
show
they
you, there's
save
you
up
can't see it at
to
all.
be competitive.
There's a.
I looked at it one time.
Everybody else. I felt like Oprah this, I felt like Oprah this year. You get a home, you get a home.
See, I only have
Actually,
4 buyers.
You do more than real estate?
I wanted to show you that it happened.
I didn't, I wasn't.
I started to bring.
I had my business for 7 years.
I was actually, I got it 5:30.
Buyers who are- people just in my hands, and I just told them, "Upfront, this is what we need to do, and
Well,
so we went in.
client, we started redoing our house in stores.
Yeah, it does.
Well, COVID.
Yeah, I'm gonna be
And they also.
looking into that home.
Yeah.
If I have anybody who's available or eligible for that.
Not quite as steady as.
Not as regular,
Um,
not as regular.
other than that, some of my investors are the ones that are waking up right now. Land, they're just investing.
You know, Tommy just listed a house that it's $435.
Open to a new client.
That's one of she's gonna buy that.
Where is it at?
It's in his neighborhood. Like
Best
Legacy
and
and
real estate gets stronger.
Independence.
It still must be getting up multiple offers.
Oh, I'm sure it will, but anything under 500, just buy them and sit on them. Rent them out and then sell them.
There was this one, in Lake Ranch, I can't believe the pricing in that neighborhood too. We showed a client that,
Oh, that are on that.
has to really go up to like 550.
Yeah, there's a lot.
There was one last week, 475 listed, but it was modeled. We're talking about 2,400 square feet. It was listed at 475, and 10 offers were on 1%. So it's gonna be sold for over 575 on 2,400 square feet. So we showed them one this week.
Wow, and it's more.
I put in the work, but it was listed at 426. But I'm like, yeah, $100,000. Well, you get a brand new home. And you would have had it for 100,000 cheaper than what people are paying for remodel. So I was like, no, we don't want to offer that. Like,
So we were just talking about.
I should have done that. That's when I'm like, oh my God, do it and renovate the thing.
And then sell it.
100,000.
Look, I went in the
Like,
worst
profit.
flip I've ever seen. So bad.
Finally,
Teeny little floors, everything came in the same color. There was still masking tape on the door.
Oh.
It was just gross.
So
And it's under contract.
Yeah, this was a piece of crap. It's under contract.
the Zimmermans, they're finally selling their house on San Andres.
Oh,
So
really?
check this out. Highland model, built in 2003. Okay, they're listing it. House across the way, listed this last week for 700,000, but it's gonna go well up to 800 because it's all been updated, it has a pool, things like that. The only
Yeah.
downside to it is that the backyard butts up against El Dorado.
At this point, who cares?
And right now, yeah, that's exactly it.
At this point, nobody cares.
Anything to this house.
I mean, it has grass.
You know, but we're listing it at 677, and I know it's gonna go over 700. It's nuts.
It's insane. Absolutely insane.
One of my clients,
So we go up tomorrow, so I don't have to wear my
And I
glasses.
was like, well.
I'm gonna end up sitting next to you, then I don't have to wear my glasses. I can't see.
Let's go. Let's go.
I can't see the distance anymore. This is when I want to actually see.
but she has.
When I actually see the screen. In most meetings, I don't see the screen. Today, I want to screen.
And there's some other things. That was
I like your style.
Yeah, my folks from California, they were pausing until the spring, until their sun starts getting closer to getting out of this year's school.
I'm scared.
Oh, yeah.
Because right now, like there's, again, like last year, like there is no possible way comps can support any of this. And so just, but it was like, whatever, it just keeps going higher. I thought it would start, the comps would start supporting. Nope. Now we get to the highest part of the comps and it's still going 100. I'm like, wait a second, so now we're 100,000 over the craziest comps. Like this. It's on my. Sitting on every page.
I mean, she was at dinner at my house this week. Her mother calls me on my birthday. My mother one time, my mother, she said, I don't know.
I gotta say.
You know what mother say about the jewels, it's pretty.
I don't think I have. I'm 80 something, 80 Moody, sorry.
Nice. It's been a couple.
Oh, yeah, okay, a couple years since you've been here.
I just.
I got Fusions this Friday. Saturday, we're heading down everybody that's vaccinated is going, so the baby is going to Farmhouse Grandpa instead of so, because right now,
Well, she's helped me call all the time now. I called her today. I'll talk to you later.
I'm on that side now. Oh, wow.
Our compliance strategy. But, you know, it's a your place.
You said what?
Partial.
I've only had my kids. I mean, granted, it was a good 12,000 mission.
Hi, girlfriend. Want me to come down there? Where are you? I know that.
I've decided.
And I know that guy right there. I know that lady in the pink sweater, yeah.
They're doing a cash up.
I'm coming down.
It's always a war.
They're looking at this week.
I am used car.
New model, right? Ready? Everybody ready?
Oh, yeah.
Ready. Hello, thank you for coming today. I want to start out by thanking Phil Broderick, our team leader, and Carol Thompson. Carol Thompson, the head of the luxury group committee. I'm sure you'll have more questions. She'll answer those at the end. And our sponsor is Stephanie Allen, who can't be with us with lawyer's title. When the luxury group committee got together, we talked about the concept of luxury is an experience. What that means is the client relationship is not just about numbers, but is about the artistry of architecture and finish ups to define luxury, exclusivity, and value. As an agent, we are the client's gateway to trades and resources, but we can also help them understand architectural luxury finish outs and top tier kitchen appliances. Dallas has great architecture, but we also have talented architects and a vibrant design district. Did you know that Dallas possesses one of only 5 design centers in the country, including New York, Chicago, Atlanta, and LA? You can find anything you want right here. Let me tell you a little bit about my background. I have been selling real estate for 21 years. I've been an interior designer for 13 years. I'm classically trained at Parsons School of Design in Paris, France. I have a degree from the Art Institute in Dallas. I took the Grand Tour of Europe, and I'm certified as a kitchen designer with National Kitchen and Bath Association. Now, I'm not saying that you need to go to that much trouble to understand architectural styles, but I am saying an hour from now, you're going to know more about architectural styles than 90% of the courses out there, and you can use that to your distinct advantage. The key is vocabulary, pattern recognition. That's all it is. Starting with your next home tour, take a look at roof pitch, front doors, and the symmetry of windows. Start using architectural terms because your clients will love it. One of the big benefits to knowing architectural styles is when you list a home, you can actually list it in architectural terms, finish outs. When you are a buyer's rep, you can compare value between the two of them. Since I started using architectural terms, no one has asked me to reduce my commission, which is a big deal. There's no more conversation about how long you've been in selling real estate. They start relying on you early because they know you know what you're looking at. Now to introduce our talented architect, Darren Tapscott. I'm so glad he's here. Darren is the second generation Texan. His father was a construction manager for the commercial giant Beck. He grew up walking commercial sites on weekends with his dad. He graduated with a master's degree from the University of Texas at Arlington. He has been practicing for over 40 years, creating some of the most beautiful homes in Park Cities, White Rock Lake, and Swiss Avenue. He is active with Preservation Dallas as a lecturer and champion of preserving iconic homes. I met Darren in 2018 at the tour of, if you haven't been to a Preservation Dallas tour, go. They're the best in the city. They happen spring and fall. But I went to the Dow Tile Dynasty home, and you can imagine how opulent that was. This is a mid-century modern home built in 67. It's over 12,000 square feet. It's on a point of 3.5 acres at White Rock Lake, and it was fabulous. He was seated at the architect's table going over original blueprints with fellow architects. My client approached the table and asked a construction question, and I thought to myself, uh-oh, he's going to talk way over her head. But not at all. He answered her question clearly in layman's terms, and she instantly understood a difficult concept. I thought to myself, note taken, this is an excellent teacher. I met him again at the Advanced Historical Specialist designation from Metrotex. The 16-hour CEU is by far the best non-legal CEU offered. Darren has been my best teacher because he talks about the specifics of architecture in Dallas. In this presentation, I expect you will recognize many homes from your past. If it has an MLS number, you can go see the address in person. Feel free to ask questions during the presentation as they arrive. So let's do my favorite thing and go to art school. Please help me welcome Darren Tapscott.
But now I have to live up to that introduction. One, I'm very informal. I don't believe in waiting till the end to ask questions. So seriously, if you have a question, I'd rather go that way. I've been working in PD, teaching continuing ed for realtors for, I think it's going 18 years now. And I've always learned that y'all have the ability to ask really good questions. So anyway, let's talk about architectural styles. I probably have a dozen books in my library on architectural styles and how to look at them. These are the three that I use for this lecture. One is a handbook. You could throw this in your car to look at it from Preservation Dallas. It's the one on the left, Historic Styles of Dallas. Houses is actually a publication by the National Real Estate Council, National Association of Realtors, and it is from the 70s. So it has some dated material in it, but it does a great job defining styles. And then Virginia's book. And I'm pleased and kind of, always sad to say that Virginia was a very good friend of mine at one point. Virginia Savage McAllister, be sure to get the second edition because it talks more about post-war housing. The first edition deals mostly with before World War II housing. Virginia passed away two years ago this year, in a month. So Virginia always contended that there were 4 sources. When I was in school, my history teacher taught that there were 2 sources, but architectural historians evolved over time too. So we're going to basically kind of look at kind of an architectural genealogy real quickly. Think of the Greek Roman temples like the Parthenon. Basically it's a square box with columns. Okay, Greco-Roman. 1,000 years later, architects took that same inspiration and translated it into what we now consider classical architecture. In particular, think Rome, Venice, Florence in this case. And from that classical vocabulary comes kind of 4 offshoots that are kind of recognized by architectural historians. Everything from Italian Renaissance to neoclassical. We do have it also in there German Baroque. There's not a lot of examples of German Baroque architecture in Texas, so we're going to skip that. But the second main tradition comes from an indigenous organic Western European origin, and that we have now called medieval. And I think you know what medieval will be in terms of castles and things like that, but I also think Stonehenge, and we'll get there. And it has two major branches, Gothic and Victorian. Gothic is pretty short, Gothic revival and exotics. And exotics include everything like octagon houses. So we're not going to touch on that either. But when you go to Victorian, it's everything from Queen Anne to a folk Victorian. And believe it or not, two of the awards I've won are for redoing Victorian houses in Dallas. So there are Victorians. One of the best Victorians I've ever seen was actually in downtown Frisco at one point. Of course, it's no longer there. Now, you talked about precedents and how you get there with you consider the two sources. But I want you to note one thing. All of these are kind of in sequence, but the third generation modern, I consider myself a third generation modern architect. We can borrow and steal from everybody. And the thing is, architects do borrow from other architects. And the quote is, when a good architect knows what to steal. Okay, from Architectural Dallas.
Yes.
This is a timeline showing the way that these styles evolved and were predominant in the Dallas area. And of course, this is a very Dallas and North Texas centric discussion we're having today. This does not apply to California, and it definitely doesn't apply to Chicago. But notice that in the 20s through 40s, there's a predominance of revival styles. Okay, and actually, as far as I'm concerned, if you want to make this slide presentation available, y'all can.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay, so go back to the 4 ideas and 4 basic formulas for style. But I want you to look at the house now in a different way, the way more an architect would. First, look at the wall. Then you look at the roof form. And then you look at the architectural details that are added to that basic box. So when you look at walls, and this is the Farnsworth House by Bispinero, look at the structure. Is the structure expressed or is it concealed by brick veneer? This is an expressed structure, so that makes it very, very unique. But also the walls are glass, so you can define it by the material, and often the material will define the style of architecture. And the third one is whether it's a flat or articulated surface. And by flat means just a simple plane or relatively simple plane versus 10-foot, 20-foot offsets between the planes. Okay, second thing to look at is roofs. There are really only architecturally 3 types of roofs: gabled, hipped, or flat. Gabled means it has the triangles on both ends. Hip means that it is sloped toward the center on all 4 sides, and a flat is self-described. But each of those types then have probably 10 or 12 types of variations on top of it. Now, pitch is also a factor in this. You have low pitches, which are less than 30 degrees, a normal pitch, which will be 30 to 45, and then anything greater than 45 degrees is considered a pitch. There's also, based on a question I got earlier, it's also very easy to think in terms of the more northern the climate in the terms of origin of the style, the steeper the pitch. The further south and closer to the equator you get, the lower the pitch will always be. Then the last thing you look at, the third thing, the architectural details. So you look at the porch, the chimney, the windows, and the doors. Classical style. I think we can all agree that this house tends to be as classical as it gets in this country. But in classical styles, we have 5 variations that we're going to look at today. We have the English, Anglo-American tradition, French, Italian, Spanish, and we are going to look at Texas regionalism, but we're going to look at it in 2 ways. Now, all classical, for most architects, comes from this one single architect, Andrea Palladio. I mean, he's the only architect to have a window named after him, Palladian window. This is kind of the epitome of where classical architecture began. Now, this is probably the best example of Palladian architecture in the entire UK, Prior Park. Notice the bridge and the house both are in the same style of Palladian. They're both owned by the National Trust. Classical architecture, and there are entire books like the Classical American House. But the classical tradition also has variations and a lineage. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, So let's go to the English Anglo-American. We're going to look at the 5 subtypes from it. And we're not going to keep going down the line because even for the first one, colonial, there's still 5 subtypes of colonial. We're just not going to go that far. But colonial architecture, then you have Georgian, Adam, neoclassical, and colonial revival. But then the primary things that you're going to look at is the column details, whether the roof is hipped or pitched, or the pitch of it, and also whether it's gabled. So this is a Dallas colonial. This is actually post-war, about 1947, I think, if I remember right. But notice the detailing on it. First, it's a simple flat plane. The wall is, there's no express structure. It is brick veneer, but the front wall is just a simple plane. There's not a lot of articulation to it. Then the definition of colonial is going to be some type of classical doorway. It's going to have pilasters, which is an engaged column, or it's going to have columns at the doorway. And then the windows in classical colonial will be casement, but in Dallas colonial, they'll always be double hung. And these are actually called cottage windows because they're dissimilar sash heights. Okay? But then the dormers are part of it. Then the articulated wing is turned 90 degrees. So the roof has a gable facing the front.
So what makes that colonial basically, you said all that, but the door right there too.
The doorway, well,
It's the main thing.
Yeah. I mean, as an architect, I would look at this. And before I even looked at the door, I would go as colonial. Red brick, white trim. That's the first thing you look at in a way. I mean, for every rule I'm going to give you today, there are going to be exceptions. But in this case, if you see shutters, big windows, and they're mullioned and have multiple mullions in them, it's going to be colonial. This is also colonial. Notice it has a Keller Williams sign on it. Do not look this up in MLS. This shot is about 7, 8 years old. It has probably sold a couple of times since then. But again, this is one of those exceptions to the rule, and that's why I included it. It has the columns that are square, transoms, sidelight, engaged dormers, the wings on both sides that are asymmetric, but still the basic block is symmetric and clean. That is what you look at first. Now, what makes this an exception to the rule is look at the roof material. It is actually a tile roof, which is extremely unusual on a colonial, but it's also a tile. It's not Spanish barrel tile. It is a French clay tile. This is a variation on colonial I want y'all to see, and it's a simple one. It's a salt box. It violates some of the rules of that colonial. It still has columns at the doorway, but it's asymmetric. There are one window on one side, 2 windows on the other side. But what makes it and defines it as a salt box is one simple thing, the roof shape coming all the way down. In New England, when these were originally built, that was the north side of the house, so the north winds would go up and over, and the major exposure was on the south side of the house.
Window AC gives it away.
Sorry?
The AC window gives it away.
Yes, yes.
Everyone in Texas.
Hey, you know, there are still houses in Dallas that have AC windows.
Bad, I would, because those things work great.
Except,
The noise is great, the cold air, so yeah.
okay, except the energy efficiency ratings, wait a minute, as an architect, we're moving toward net zero houses. I mean, the building codes, if you don't know, that may be the next class y'all need to take is what is net zero and carbon neutral. Colonial revival characteristics. I don't even want to go there today. Okay, so in colonial revival, it will be symmetric. It will have the details we've talked about. The biggest change between before the war and after the war is that the windows will be what we consider gang windows. There'll be 2 or 3 windows in a row with just mullion spacing bars between them. Okay, so you'll have the elaborate cornice. You'll also be beginning to pick up transoms and the gang windows.
Can you
Okay.
go back just a second and elaborate on mullions, please?
Okay, this is where I'm hesitant as an architect to use the correct word. So actually the bars that are between the windows, when you have basic window is a sash that moves up and down in an opening. That sash then has multiple lights in it. And those multiple lights are divided by, correctly, the word is muntin, M-U-N-T-I-N. But the wood block between 2 sets of windows is the mullion.
Muntin and a mulligan.
Yes.
There's some sale word.
And that's not everybody.
And that's kind of an interesting distinction. One of the other things I've done is for about 23 years, I also serve on the Dallas Landmark Commission's designation committee. And we write all the designation reports for the entire city of Dallas. So since I've been there, we've done more than 60 designations. And I had to write like a report for the Stanley Marcus House. They are difficult to write and you have to be very precise in language. We try to use the National Park Service standard as a standard of what we did. Okay, so I did realize that not everybody does know vocabulary, just like the window. This is a simple one that I found online from doors. Pediment above, pilasters are these columns, but they're actually engaged in part of the siding. Then panel doors and the entablature is the top crown piece, but not the pediment. Now, in some architecture, the correct word for that, where they have the word pediment, is tympanum. We aren't even going to try that one. Okay, some more colonial in Dallas. This is, again, a classic one in that it's post-war. Classics around, dormers, and absolutely symmetric. Post-war, a little bit less successful, but still falls into the colonial family. And I can't think of any other place. Because, okay. I'm getting there, thank you. A couple of things. One, there's actually a variation on colonial architecture called Mid-Atlantic colonial. And it's the colonial style that was predominant in Pennsylvania to Northern Virginia. So New Jersey, that area. And one of the characteristics of it is the overhanging front roof with pendants underneath it. But again, engaged dormer windows, and it is more or less symmetric with wings. So for lack of a better word, I would still place this one in colonial architecture. But don't confuse a client if you're showing it by saying it's a Mid-Atlantic colonial. Just say colonial. But as colonial progressed and got more sophisticated, and as America as a country got wealthier, we now move into federal. And we prefer in the US the word federal to Georgian. We had just fought a war. We had just won. And so the word Georgian was not used by a lot of American architects at that point. Think of federal as colonial on steroids. All the characteristics are still there. It's basically a balanced facade with a wing in this case, half or partial Palladian windows at the top, the arch top window, but then every window is very carefully double hung, classical detail, steep roof, but also side gabled. There is also a slight variation that this one demonstrates beautifully, and that's the difference between Northern colonial and Southern colonial. Southern colonial, the chimneys will be on the outside. Northern colonial, the chimneys will be on the inside.
Okay.
This is getting closer to a Southern colonial also. And notice this, and also there's one more characteristics of federal that will always be here. Federal houses always have a transom above the window, whether it is rectangular or whether it's an arch.
You say that about the fireplaces again?
Okay.
Which is northern, which is southern.
Okay, think about heat and cold. And in the South, we always try to get heat out of the house as quickly as possible. So the fireplace chimneys are on the outside. So their heat radiates out. And in the North, you put them dead center of the house.
Got it.
The house one of the houses I redid in New Hampshire, they never, even recently, would not put heat on the second floor. They simply rely on the fireplace on the ground floor, heating the second floor of a house that was built in 1759. Yes.
Tell us about the outside corner decorations.
Oh, okay. The question is about the outside corner. This articulation in the brick is called a coin, Q-U-O-I-N.
How do you say it?
Coin, Q-U-I-O-N.
Oh, okay.
It is a Q.
I thought it was C-O-I-N-I-N-G. That's what I've been writing. Coining.
Next time I do this, I'm going to have to bring the book from Cyril Harris. There's about 6 good architectural dictionaries, and one of them is Cyril Harris's. But what it is to emulate stone. Think about our British traditions, and you notice a lot of British houses have articulated limestone where it's dressed, and the center field will be undressed limestone. If depending also if it's in the Norfolk area of UK, it'll have flint stone infill. So you'll have brick corners with flint fields. Absolutely incredible. We don't do that, but it's a way to pull back into a tradition, and it's articulating the corners so that they disappear. A lot of classical Roman architecture has these articulated corners. Yes.
Aaron, you're on a roll. Would you talk about the cornices at the top of the roof?
Okay,
and the
and well, I
centerpiece
said
over the
also
windows?
it's more articulated. The Federal has a much heavier entablature or cornice work. Entablature means everything included, the frieze, the gutter work and so on. But in this, you see outside, okay, I really do need probably a slide in
Okay, you're good.
that explains this. The front piece that's the closest to the shingle of the roof is called the fascia. And the fascia will usually in classical architecture have some type of molded shape to the front of the fascia. Then underneath is the soffit. And in this case, the soffit is decorated with dentil work, just like it sounds, dental, D-E-N-T-I-L. And then you come down and there will be another bed mold. And then coming down onto the face of the brick is a frieze board. Frieze, and the dental work can also be on the frieze board in some styles.
And the windows?
Oh, windows are 6/6, which means there's 6 lights over 6 lights.
And the capstone?
Well, keystones. Yeah, keystone is this. But notice there's also an articulated band right here. It doesn't really show in the photograph, but you can see the shadow. Usually, most of the time in higher style houses, that will be done in limestone. Okay, this is a Federal, and this has an MLS number, so this is less than 3 months old. But notice the symmetry. They define the main house, again, outside chimney. They define the main house from here to here with a wing and an annex that steps down. Very classic column on the front with second floor balcony. Again, limestone above the windows is the head and with a keystone, but notice no dental work. It's a little bit simpler. Okay, classical revival. The easiest way to identify classical revival, because whether you use the word Greek revival, which is out of vogue right now and tends to be a specific period of time. Classic revival, 2-story porch with columns. Simple. That is the key defining element. The windows on the ground floor will always be significantly taller than the second floor in a classic house. You'll also have a very ornate doorway with columns or pilasters. And notice the pediment here is high with a transom inside the pediment. And you also have dormers with what is sometimes called a widow's walk across the front. Widow's walk is usually a New England term applied to the cresting at the very top. But in this case, we don't have a good word other than that. Again, 2-story columns, just simple. But again, symmetry defined with a wing to the side to handle overflow needs, functions. 2-story columns. I wanted this one though. This one actually is kind of the exception to the rule. It's asymmetric. But the architect that designed it made you think it's symmetric when you look at it. When you look at it, your eye goes to the door and the 4 columns, and then everything else goes back into shadow. But notice 2 windows on the left, 3 windows on the right. And it's a front-facing gable. Okay, another asymmetric classic revival. And again, this one's actually quite good. And that this is a historic one in that it has 16/1 windows. But 2-story porch, dental work applied where the frieze would be with brackets, oriel windows, and then, cresting on the roof. But notice how asymmetric the actual form of the house is. But again, your eye goes to the columns as the center defining element. This is one that I included. This is a house I redid. And even Virginia had a problem handling this one. I want you to try to define what this one is. It is a flat facade, so you place it into the classical realm. It has a very ornate classic entryway, and it has columns on either side. It has arch windows, but there is a Tudor arch here. It is limestone trimmed. It also has an oriel window, which is Tudor. And then when you look at the very roof, it has exposed rafter tails and brackets of craftsman style. Fortunately, when I was in school, one architectural historian wrote a book called Eclectic Architecture in the US. This would simply be called Classical Eclectic, and don't go any further.
Is that one of the homes down in Swiss?
This one's actually on Gaston Avenue.
Okay.
There were two of them identical. The parents lived on Swiss.
Okay.
They hired, when their daughter, they had two daughters. When the
Uh-huh.
two daughters got married, they hired C.D. Hill, who is a very prominent Dallas architect, to design wedding gifts for their daughters.
Okay.
This is one of the wedding gifts.
Because I recognize the offset patio over on
Yeah.
the left or the right-hand side.
But there you have the chimney center.
Actually, this house has two chimneys. They are not actually dead center. It actually has three chimneys in this house. There are 8 fireplaces. No, there are 4 fireplaces that are all rookwood tile. Then there's the kitchen chimney. And so when you add it all together, this is actually the outside wall coming down. So this is the living room. And then there's a chimney on this side where the dining room is. Then the bedrooms above also have matching fireplaces. And there's yet another chimney in the back that you can't see. That is the kitchen chimney.
Oh, well,
I am too, because, quite honestly, that house was unusually built too. It had a steel deck under the terrace where the coal room was for heat. This house is built when we still use coal heat houses.
What style were you calling that house?
Huh?
What style?
Classical eclectic.
That sounds good, okay.
Okay, this is about as classical French as we can get, and it's on the listing now. I want you to look again. It is symmetric, basically very flanking wings. Then it has the articulated columns, there are pilasters in this case, full pediment. Then it has dormers on the roof, dormers on the roof, dormers on the roof, and then also the Art Nouveau inspired windows on the ground floor. But anytime you see this roof form, it's called a mansard roof. Don't even hesitate. It's French.
I had somebody, excuse me, I had somebody ask a question on the chat. They wanted to know what period was coal the main source of heat in North Texas.
1880 through about 1910.
November through.
His answer's better than mine. Actually, one of the houses I redid, a historic house I redid in East Dallas, the original builder was a general contractor, but he also owned a coal company. He made more money from the coal company than from general contracting. Okay, and in Dallas, this is probably the granddaddy of all classic French houses. This is the Aldridge house on Swiss Avenue. And actually, I did do a room in it back in so many years ago. Most of y'all weren't born. We redid the kitchen when it was converted from a private residence to a house. I was still working for somebody else. But notice everything we talked about, dormers that are in zinc in this case, classic columns that go up, in this case as a 2-story into the pediment at the top, a little bit of framing up here, very ornate windows on the ground, balconies, and then the terrace that wraps all the way around. So this is a detail of
The
that.
chimneys were on the outside.
Sorry.
Chimneys were on the outside.
Yes.
In the sun.
You got it.
What was that MLS number on that last one?
Can you go back one?
Okay.
The French.
Oh, the Aldridge house is on Swiss Avenue.
The Aldridge is on Swiss Avenue.
Classic
Oh,
French.
the other French?
That one?
That's listed for 10 million. I think it's sold recently.
I sold it.
I want to thank also, quite honestly, Cynthia, for pulling all the MLS numbers. Most of my practice, in fact, I've only done last time I did a house in Willow Bend, the client actually said, we don't know if you work north of LBJ. I don't do a lot of work north of LBJ. Okay, the French defining elements. There are actually 4 basic subtypes of French style. We're going to look at a little bit of them. Chateau-esque to Norman. The analysis is the same in that you have basically a smooth wall plane. It will usually be done in brick or limestone, very seldom in other material. It does not mix materials. Usually the ground floor windows will be larger than the second floor, but the main characteristic is that it will have a steep pitch with a lot of articulated elements on that roof. Zinc dormers in particular, but then some type of dormer. The chimneys are usually on the outside. This is a classic, and from that slide, this house comes up. This, I believe, is on Armstrong Parkway in Dallas. This is, but notice also this double flared roof.
Go back, would you, double what?
Okay, look at it has two pitches. You have two pitches in that roof. The primary roof comes down at a pitch that's very steep, but then it flattens out just at the end, almost giving you the illusion of a mansard roof, but not being a true mansard. Y'all are asking really good questions. Another French, and again, everything we talked about, large ground floor windows, columns that go up around to define the porch, extremely articulated entablature, a lot of dormers, even fireplace lightning rods at the top. A little bit simpler. This one was just in Sunday's paper. A competitor firm has it. It's 12 million. It's also 12,000 square feet. So you're paying about 1,000 a square foot. Then there's also country French, and this is also from Park Cities. But what makes it French, again, is these steep pitches, and look at the number of roofs that are defined by it. You basically have, I'm sorry?
19.5 million.
Okay. Which one?
The one you just had on there.
Oh, they said 12 in the paper.
Sold.
Oh,
It's second over last in sales price.
well, then I know a very happy realtor tonight. Country French, our surface tension is tight. You do have columns. These have probably been changed out at some point, but the main giveaway for French in this case is simply the fact that it has so many defined roof forms. Again, French country, a lot of roof forms, rare exception, a little bit of a front-facing gable, but notice the pediment has columns going up, but all executed in brick with a brick pediment.
Can you go back and talk about the brickwork? The, what is that technique?
Oh, the lime wash. Also, there is one technique that's used a lot in architecture and a lot in Park Cities, and that is something called lime washed, and that is literally lime applied to an orange or red brick. In Dallas, we have an unfortunate habit of using a brick that is local clay called orange common. And almost all mid-century modern houses are built with orange common. It is one of the softest bricks sold on the market, short of a Mexican brick, which is usually sun-fired or single-fired. It is an extremely soft brick, so to preserve its life, builders started painting, either painting the brick or by lime washing it, which gives an additional wearing layer, just like zinc on a roof. So this is basically lime washed. And that is very, very old. And lime does wear off. Every time it rains, some of the lime will wash off this house.
Where's that house?
That one is in University Park, right off of Preston Road. Something like Normandy. I don't remember. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So what's the difference in the lime wash versus the German schmear?
German schmear is permanent and heavier. And yet you've been watching Joanna Gaines.
Not necessarily.
No, but no, there's kind of an architect's kind of like right now, hate HGTV. There is no way in
We
Dallas.
hate it too. So.
There's no way right now, you know, when Property Brothers say they can do this renovation in 8 weeks.
Right.
It takes 16 weeks to get a building permit right now. Okay, I'm going to show this one because this is also in Sunday's paper. This is the epitome of a style from French called chateauesque. Just think, yeah, I don't even need to explain it. Somebody spent too much time at Disneyland.
That's right.
Just the character defining feature of this one is simply the turret. And this one is in Southlake, and it is for sale currently. Next is we're going to look at the Mediterranean. I'm using Mediterranean as a catchphrase to talk about Italian Renaissance, Spanish Revival, Mission, Monterey, and Pueblo. And we're not really going to talk about Pueblo simply because we're not in Santa Fe. Okay, Italian. How do you define Italian roofs? They're going to be lower pitch. First of all, the walls are going to be somewhat more articulated, but basically still very classic Italian will be flat wall plane. Usually it can be done in stone or stucco. The roofs will be low pitched, bless you, with clay tile roofs. Also, character defining feature is the arch. This one has so many arches on it. You look at the segmented arches above the garage doors, then you start working across the segmented arch where the kitchen is, segmented arches on this side, full arch, 3 full arches, six floral arches. So again, the arch is one of the character defining features of an Italian classic. Again, same thing. The arch dominates everything. This is a great night shot because it shows the arches in particular. But notice this one's done in limestone and it will have classical detailing. Usually the difference also, we'll get to that. This is Highland Park. This is kind of a perfect Italian Renaissance interpretation. Limestone walls. Notice the coin is articulated by a different texture and a slightly different shade of limestone. Then you have the arched entry with columns on both sides, Juliet balcony or air balcony with a very flat clay tile roof. Everything we just talked about, this house has. Now it's been added on to, like recently. They did not tear this one down. Same thing.
That looks like the same house with more googly got one. More stuff. Looks like a box house.
Yeah, but that box house is now with the addition, probably, I know the street it's on, it's probably about 17 million now. And again, this is an Italian style and this is a new construction. This is, I mean, everything that we've just talked about, this has. Now, Spanish Revival, Spanish Revival is a very vital style in this area. Think about Highland Park. When Highland Park was being developed, their city hall and their shopping center, Highland Park Village, which is on the National Register of Historic Places, are all in a Spanish Revival style. This is definitely a style that was significant in Dallas, at times is. And I want you, from a historic viewpoint, there are two particular architectural firms that you look at, and they have both built mainly in Lakewood. Is Clifford Hutzel and Dines and Craft. Hutzel did over 50 houses, and he's only known in every style from Tudor to French to Spanish, but he's known for his Spanish houses. And Spanish houses are different from Italian in that they have an asymmetric form typically. They won't have that flat front. They'll start being L-shaped. They'll start having wings that are more prominent or even come forward. They will have the tile roof. It will be a low pitch, and they'll have arch windows or arch doorways. This is actually a realtor's house in Highland Park, but this is a classic C.D. Hill, same architect. I showed you the house that I couldn't identify. This is his work, but notice the archway over this huge second floor window, archway at the entry, tile roof, but front facing gable, L-shaped, everything I just said this house has. This is in Lakewood and same thing. But notice the elliptical window coming in and notice how prominent and how articulated the chimney cap is. That's also a characteristic of Spanish Revival architecture. This is Spanish new on a larger scale. This is about a 12,000 square foot house probably. This one's for sale now. And notice again, it's asymmetric. You have this wing that comes at you, but you also have a classical entry in a way, but no columns and pilasters. They're articulated with brackets, but the archway and the tile roof. And then you also have balconies, and it's also asymmetric even on the front facade. One large window with smaller windows going off to the right. Now, for some architects, this is kind of the epitome of what Spanish should be. This is actually Spanish architecture is done in Santa Barbara. But no porch, no columns, arched doorway. It is a little bit asymmetric, but not terribly. And the asymmetry has to do a little bit with the wing on the side. But notice the chimney caps again. So this is classic Santa Barbara Spanish. This is Clifford Hutzel's own house. It was listed last year for $2.2 million. It is also a Dallas landmark, certified landmark. And this elliptical window becomes his trademark at a certain point on his Spanish houses. It is something that he actually stole, and he admitted where he stole it from. Gene Autry's ranch in California had that window. He comes back to Dallas and then incorporates it in all his later work. It also has the turret, which he loved. He never put the staircase in the turret. He always put his bathrooms in the turret as a rule. Now, like I said, every rule I give you, there's going to be an exception. But in this case, that is a bathroom in that window. Then he also borrows from the Monterey style, a cantilevered porch, which he loved, but it was very heavily articulated in wood. And the wood members are 8x8, very heavy for the columns. We're going to touch on this really quickly. There's not a lot of these, but because I won an award doing one of these, I'm going to show it. And that's mission. And the simple character defining feature of it is simply, if it looks like the Alamo, it's a mission style. This is the one we won the award for. Actually, I got to do this house twice, same owner, but we had water damage in between. So every 17 years, I get to redo this house. And notice, I mean, the mission in top is repeated in several places on this. This was actually Virginia McAllister's own house. But it was a mission style also. So yes, Alamo, it's mission. And this is also in the National Register. This is the Bianchi House in Dallas. It's a one-story mission, but done by one of the most prominent Dallas architectural firms of all time, Lang & Witchell. They did the DP&L building, Dallas Power and Light building, the Lone Star Gas building, the Higginbotham Pearlstone building. They did over half the commercial buildings in 1920 in downtown Dallas. This is one of their rare small houses. They did mostly houses on Swiss Avenue and Park Road.
Where's that one?
This one's on Rieger, and it's in desperate need of restoration.
What did you call
It had a
it?
fire.
What did you call it?
It's the name of the first owner was Bianchi. Well, did your grandfather own a architectural
We're all
company?
in Italy.
Well, he came from Italy, but he because he did so much commercial work, he owned a concrete casting company. He got Lang & Witchell to do his house. Now, I've actually looked at the original architectural drawings for this house because I had a client that was interested in buying it. I could tell a draftsman had done 2 of the sheets in the set, and probably a student draftsman. As an architect, when you're taught at a certain point in time before CAD, you had to learn hand letter. And the older you get, the stronger your hand lettering is. Hand lettering on 2 of the sheets in the set are very shaky. Okay, simple one, Monterey. One single character defining feature of Monterey is this cantilevered porch balcony. If it doesn't have columns touching the ground, it's Monterey basically. And it's also incorporated under the primary roof as opposed to a secondary additive roof. Great example of Monterey. And that's it, because you don't have any. But Monterey, that balcony was stolen by other styles also. And these are Texas regional. The top one is David Williams and the bottom one is Dilbeck's house, a Dilbeck house in Stevens Park. Okay, we talked about medieval styles from Victorian, and I'm going to include Farmhouse as the last. Yeah.
So when you were showing the Italian styles, I would have typically told the buyer those were Mediterranean. Is that a universal? Can I interchange those
Mediterranean can
terms?
refer to anything that you can't identify.
So I'm pretty much good to just call it Mediterranean.
In the 70s, there was a particular house builder who did a lot of upper middle class housing that they were borrowed a little bit from Spanish style. They borrowed a little bit from Italian style. So he just used the word Mediterranean to everything.
Because north of LBJ, you're seeing more of that far as Mediterranean. Am I correct? Like in Starwood, for example, there's a lot of those. I would just call
I would, if in doubt, always use the word Mediterranean.
Okay.
If you can identify it by the columns or by the lack of columns, then you can get into Spanish or Italian.
okay.
But also remember, symmetry is critical. Almost always Spanish is asymmetric, Italian is almost always symmetric. Okay, so, and you know there is no one a medieval precedent in English architecture. If you're in the area around London, you're going to have half timbering work. If you're in the area around Norfolk, you're going to have flint walls. If you're in Cotswold, you're going to have limestone infill. And if you're in the center of England, you're going to have brick. So just think in terms of materials or incidental. This is actually stone and brick. But in America, that led to, especially in the 1840s, a creation of a style of wood Victorian. And this is just a great Queen Anne Victorian, a lot of stick work. This is also a Victorian in Dallas that I did win an award for also. This is 1883, but notice how simple and pared down Texas Victorian is to most of the country. If you look at the houses in Eureka, California, which is kind of there at the center of Victorian California, or San Francisco, compared to ours, we have a Midwestern sensibility that stripped all the extra things down and you put in just enough to make it Victorian.
Ones in Galveston have a lot of extra
Gingerbread.
Yes.
stuff.
Accoutrements.
No, well, they did. Galveston, though, was a very wealthy port city at one point. A friend of mine is director of preservation, Stuart Galveston, so I spend a lot of time in Galveston. And they have a great inventory, but Galveston was incredibly poor when Galveston was wealthy. Okay, but these are two folk Victorians in my own neighborhood. Notice they just have the high pitched lines, they have columns, square columns. They're just very simple folk Victorian, but folk Victorian is actually making a comeback with some architects right now. There is a new Victorian that's coming in, and this is the inspiration.
You saying folk?
Folk. Folk. Well, I'm very careful when I use the word folk. No, that's a good point. I'm very careful. I'm very old Southern family, so I do slur some syllables out there.
And trust me, my hearing's not the best either, which is the reason why.
So
Yes.
those last two pictures you showed, I would mistakenly call those crafts. How can you tell the difference between that folk or that pared down Victorian look craftsman to me?
Okay.
Especially the lower left, I would have told somebody that was.
It has to do with roof pitch in this case.
Okay.
There's a couple of reasons for that. One is the size of the porch. This is an L-shaped porch, which is very, very, very Victorian as opposed to across the front. But also notice how this is an additive roof, and look how really steep this is. Craftsman is much lower pitch. Okay, character defining features of a Tudor. The easy thing is that it will usually almost always, again, there are exceptions, always be asymmetric in terms of the front elevation. There will be an archway at the door usually. There are high, steep pitches facing the street primarily. You will always have timber work. The minute you see timber work on a house, and there's no exception to it, it is Tudor. Just if it has timber work, it is Tudor. But also the windows will be tall and vertical. Remember on the colonial windows when we talked about the muntins, how they're basically a golden rectangle and that they have a 5:8 ratio. These are 3:1 ratios of height to width. And this is a Tudor that I redid also. The reason I included it is this started out as a 1923 Tudor. It had just shy 2,000 square feet. When we finished adding on to it, we did not go out, we went up. We simply incorporated the attic. We bumped up the attic. It has 5 different plate lines, and it now has 3,800 square feet. Actually 3,860, I think. But it has all the character defining features. Immediately identified as Tudor because the timber work, arch door behind, a Tudor arch there. Yes. A recent Tudor, and this also picks up another character defining feature, is the importance of the chimney during this period of time and this style. The chimney is usually on the front face as opposed to the side, which is going to be not always true. But notice the segmental arch instead of full arch. But this has an oriel window and again, half timbering. The oriel window is also a giveaway for usually Tudor architecture. Highland Park, half Tutoring gives it away. And this decoration is also characteristic of older Tudors, like 1930 Tudors. See how the front gable has that articulation in its scallop, that's called a barge board. And it is always articulated on older houses. Simple Tudor also, but again, arched doorway. And this one has, instead of half timbering, stucco with stone infill. So you have the brick base, stone around the doorway and archway, very tall windows again, and then the chimney is articulated by introducing stucco and stone. Oh, wow. Same thing. Everything we just talked about, again, is repeated in this house. Arch doorways, except this is actually a Gothic arch. When it comes to a single point, it's a Gothic. If it looks like it has 2 points, it's a Tudor. Same thing. Notice to get this, they used red brick to articulate the chimneys, as well as the chimney pots, which are typical also. There's some type of finish out on it. This has the conical tower, but what keeps it from being French is that it has the oriel window, very exaggerated vertical windows, and then on this side, that little bit of half timbering. Now, Tudor in Dallas actually led to another style called minimal traditional. We're not going to spend a lot of time with it because minimal traditional never evolved as a style, but as a result of economics. After the war, the goal was to build 1 million houses for returning servicemen. And to do that, the FHA started setting up loan programs, as y'all probably know. But one of the requirements to get an FHA is that it had to be approved by FHA in terms of style. They did not like contemporary. So there are very few contemporaries that were ever financed through FHA, but they wanted to build as cheaply as possible. So this is about taking a Tudor and building it cheaply. And I do mean cheaply, not in terms of quality of material necessarily, but if it wasn't necessary, like the stained glass in a Tudor from the 20s, strip it out. But the character defining features of it is it will be asymmetric like the Tudor. They'll still try to keep some type of archway at the door. And the windows will be much, much larger without that proportion of 3:1. Now, the farmhouse. This is Midwestern farmhouse, complete with Savannahville in the front yard. This is a contemporary farmhouse. Okay, the easy way to look at a contemporary farmhouse is in this part of the century, it'll be white, HGTV, think HGTV and you'll be able to define a farmhouse, but it'll have contemporary windows. It'll usually be L or T-shaped. It'll also have multiple roof forms. Another very simple one, this is in MLS. It has the front porch with columns, so it is definitely in that farmhouse vocabulary. Again, it's been painted white. And also there's one other characteristic in this area in particular is this repetitive, somehow or somewhere there will be a repetitive window form often.
Aren't the windows usually black or just?
It's black or dark gray, yeah. Unfortunately, like I said, unfortunately, HGTV, the formula is white with dark trim or black with black trim. So this is actually not anywhere in this area, but this is such a classic farmhouse in terms of architectural style. Multiple roof forms, it's L-shaped, it has everything going on, and it has these incredibly beautiful windows. And of course, it sits on a beautiful site. Okay, we're now up to the modern house, and I'm going to show the Rakowski house. And this includes everything from prairie to the new style that I think may be emerging. Okay, we start with prairie. Prairie did really emerge from the legacy of Victoria. And there's a lot of architectural historians that actually will write that Frank Lloyd Wright was actually borrowing from the Victorian vocabulary of the free plan and that pieces of house could go off. And then Wright took that the next step and started extending it into the landscape. But how to identify prairie for y'all? Low pitched roof. It will be hit. It will not have a gable as a rule. Now it can contain a dormer, but it will be a center dormer, not repetitive dormers. It will have a porch, usually about 50% of the width of the house to full width of the house. It'll also have very, very heavy masonry columns. They won't be light, delicate wood ones. They will be done in stone or brick, and they will be 16 to 24 inches size. Also, you'll have ganged windows, again, repetitive windows lumped together, so you get a lot of light. This is Frank Lloyd Wright, Roby House in Chicago. Probably one of his most famous. It's owned by University of Chicago now, and it has been restored, so you can go through it again. But notice the cantilever plane, and one of the things that he did, this is entry detail. Look at the number of planes and the articulation in it. One of the things that Frank Lloyd Wright was notorious about was, because he wrote about it, is he liked to bring you into a house with a very low ceiling. One of his houses I was in was the ceiling in the entry hall was 6'6". I'm 6'1". I was claustrophobic. But then he has you explode into a two-story space, the living room. And then the living room flows into the rest of the house. He began actually the open plan in a lot of ways. But the other point of it is Frank Lloyd Wright was not the only architect in Chicago doing it. There were lots of architectural firms playing with this. And architectural historians at this time don't even know what to call this style. If you go back to the architectural books of the 1920s, they called this American Secession. Secession is a reference to the Vienna School of Arts and Crafts. They don't know how to label it. They don't know whether it's what it is. But there are lots of architects. Frank Lloyd Wright, and obviously. Parts of my family knew him, and I have friends that actually have stayed with him at Taliesin. Was a very difficult man. Yes, my father did not particularly care for him by the time the theater center was finished, but he simply outlived all his competitors. Everybody else died before him. Okay, Prairie School in Dallas area. Notice hipped roof, low pitch, massive columns, ganged windows, everything we've talked about.
I'm gonna say, Carol, look at the windows.
Yeah.
They're 9/1.
Yeah, and well, this is a historic house. So on the bedroom wing, this has probably been the sleeping room, and there's the AC unit. It's 9/1, but then on the very front, you have leaded glass units over big pieces of glass, which is typical. Even the living room is leaded glass over one really big piece of glass. This is the Higginbotham house. This is considered on Swiss Avenue. This is considered one of the 2 best Prairie School houses in the entire state of Texas. It is done by somebody that worked in Wright's office. This one's for sale now. Again, same thing. Ganged windows, but this time with brick brackets. But this has the center dormer. But notice how big the columns are. And in this case, the columns are masonry and they're paired. But that style also leads to this. This is a classic example, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is an American four-square. This is an middle-class house. For those were upper-class houses because the Higginbothams were one of the wealthiest families in Dallas. This is a middle-class house, and this was built in 1913 by a land developer. We actually know the whole history of this house too. Basically, it's 4 rooms on the ground floor, 4 rooms on the second floor, and the porte-cochere is added. And above the porte-cochere is a sleeping porch because there's no air conditioning. There's glass on all 3 sides. Those windows are still work because they lower down into the wall so you get cross ventilation. Craftsman. Craftsman is going to vary from Prairie in that the porch will usually be about half the width. It also will have front facing and usually 2 gables or more, but you'll see that if the Prairie has the hip roof, Craftsman has the gable roof. Also, the Prairie usually has a boxed cornice, so you don't see the rafter tails. Craftsman is always going to have exposed rafter tails, whether it has a barge board or not. It will not be articulated, but then you'll have some type of bracketing. Either the beams will be expressed or you'll have diagonal brackets underneath. Ganged windows again, and usually the columns are going to be hybrid. They're going to be part wood, part brick. Oh, one last thing. This is for Landmark. This is from Landmark Commission, one of the idiosyncrasies of Dallas. And it is true of the style. The masonry of the brick has to go all the way to the ground. It can't stop at the foundation line. This all comes from this one project, basically. This is the Gamble House, as in Procter & Gamble in Pasadena. This was done by 2 brothers, Green and Green. They're probably one of the most famous architectural firms in California. But notice it is asymmetric. It is all clad in shingles, but you have the exposed porch on the side. You have the front-facing gable with exposed beams. This was their summer house.
But wasn't it also built out of all wood?
Yeah.
To gold?
Yeah. And also, if you've seen the inside, most of the inside is teak or mahogany. And the stained glass on the front door is Tree of Life, and it is like by Tiffany.
Oh, wow.
It is not an inexpensive summer house. It's kind of like the houses on the Hamptons. But in Dallas, we get this. This is a 2-story Craftsman, 2 gables facing the front, exposed rafter tails, beams expressed. Notice the outside rafter is a heavier one, but it's not articulated. It's cut the same way. But then this shows the brackets, and then this shows the double column material. This one's in Highland Park, but it's a Craftsman that's been redone. This one's also in the park. This one is in the Swiss Avenue district, but on Bryan Parkway. And I wanted to show it because it has the 2 gables, but they're different pitches. So you have compound pitches. You have the pitch above the roof. You have the rafter tails exposed, but here you have river stone going all the way down as your column defining feature. There's probably only 10 houses in the city of Dallas that have this detail. It's very typical of Oregon, though. Art Deco, we can move on. Just think square boxes stacked on square boxes with steel windows, and that's character defining, and white stucco. I don't know, I'm going to show you one exception. This is a Dilbeck. And this is Charles Dilbeck, is one of the most famous architects in Dallas from this period of time. He is known for his ranches in particular and for Spanish. He did 4 of these. He did one neighborhood called Cochran Heights where he did 32 houses. He did 4 in this Art Deco style. But notice steel windows, and this is a very small house. It's only 1,100 square feet. But railing inside. This one I include because it's a recreation of a New York World's Fair house from 1939, but it's in Wichita Falls. And it also was never painted. It was always intended to be that brick. Modern, we're going to talk about just touch, because as this year started, there were 3 modern houses in Highland Park. Today, there are 2. It is a style that's being bulldozed faster than you can think. But basically, the difference between Art Deco and modern will be the curved form. The modern will always have the porthole windows. They'll always be done in stucco, a lot of times with a railing across the top and then the glass block. A modern house. Now, Texas regionalism. There's 3 primary architects I want you to think about with Texas regionalism. David Williams, O'Neill Ford, who then worked for David Williams, and then Frank Welch, who just recently passed away. This is the Bromberg Johnson house. It sits on 7.5 acres of White Rock Lake. Yes, it is also a designated City of Dallas landmark. But notice about Texas regionalism, low pitch gable, very simple roof form like the farmhouse. But what makes the difference between a modern farmhouse and Texas regional is going to be tactile influences of having the more expressive balconies. This is a screened in porch, and that was original. This is the screened in porch across the front. House was designed so that you could live at White Rock, open the windows, and still have cool air even in the summer. This is probably, for most architects, one of the most important houses in all of North Texas, believe it or not. This is a Texas farmhouse. This is by David Williams. There are at least 2 major David Williams houses in Highland Park. But again, notice he based it on the German influence of Castroville and New Braunfels. Those farmhouses is what leads to this. It's done in a lime washed brick, shutters, but then simple metal roof forms, very simple geometry, but also broken up. And he borrows from the Monterey style of the porch, but the porch becomes the porch cover. This is an O'Neill Ford from the 30s in Dallas off of Turtle Creek. Again, low pitch, very flat roof in metal. And in this case, the brick was painted. This is the David Williams house juxtaposed against the Dilbeck Texas farmhouse. Almost right. But notice he uses Austin stone. It's L-shaped. It's actually a C shape. This wing comes out at 45 degrees to you, and that's the library. And this is my exception to the rule slide because this is a front-facing gable. Typically, you would have had a hip roof on this. Now, we reach the fun part for architects. There are 3 people that in the 1930s completely changed the direction of American architecture, and none of them are American. And that is Walter Gropius, Lacobusia, and Mies van der Rohe. As Nazis, Germany became more politically desperate. It was the best school of architecture in all of Europe, which was the Bauhaus. Okay, for most of y'all probably know parts of this, and I'm not going to go there. I've spent a lot of time with it. This is Bauhaus-inspired building. This is the Facade work. Notice the steel glass, very simple planes. The glass is all brought out to the front, so it's all curtain wall, steel infill, etc. So this is Walter Gropius's own house. Walter Gropius, when he leaves Nazi Germany, comes to the US and teaches at Yale. Harvard, sorry. He takes over at GSD, Graduate School of Design at Harvard. And he builds this house for himself in Connecticut. And this shows you all of the Gropius design features. A banded window that goes all the way across, extremely horizontal glazing. It is going to be in stucco. It is going to be stucco. It's not going to have any articulation. It is the smoothest skin you can possibly get. But he also uses glass block, but he also introduces one thing that every architect since has borrowed and uses, and that is a skewed feature. He takes the front porch canopy and bends it at 15 degrees to the main house. Now on the back side, and I don't have a slide of it, he paints the terrace because it faces south. in terms of peach and blush. And so he picks up more warmth. He wants that summer sun to feel warmer than it really is. This is Lacobusia's Villa Savoie. And the reason he is so famous in American architecture is he writes of the house as a machine. Now, machine, the way he used it, had 2 meanings or 3 meanings, depending on who you read. But he put the service-based components on the ground. You parked your car under the house. There was no garage. Then you walked up to the entertaining, the servants also had bedrooms on the ground floor. You went up to the main level, but the main living, the way he proposed this house to be used was the 3rd level terrace. That was the outdoor entertaining area. But
There's a house that's for sale, if it was for sale, it's similar, like in Dallas. We need a fake buyer unless y'all got one, because I'd love to go see it.
if you find one this good in Dallas, I mean,
It's probably not that good, but it's like.
there's actually one in there's one in Bentry that's almost as good.
It's open and it's white and it's, I don't know, I'll have to look it up, but I don't even remember the millions of dollars it was. I'd love to get in there, but I'm sure you get out.
There's one house that borrows from this vocabulary in Bentry that I've always loved, and it was done by a Chicago firm called Booth and Nagel, and I can't remember the name of the street. It was, but then the people that bought it doubled it in size. And I'm sorry, I can,
Stuff like that.
Yeah.
Why, yeah.
okay, anyway, the machine was also a reference to the machine, and he loved ships. He loved steamships. He wrote about it excessively. And so notice how this looks like the smoke turret. Hopefully not from the Titanic. Okay, the third one we talked about is Mies van der Rohe. I'm giving you a semester course in architectural history in 45 minutes, hopefully, and we're probably over now. But this is Mies van der Rohe, and he used much more sumptuous materials than the other 2 architects. He used a lot of travertine as his wall surface. He also would use things like antique Verde marble in his Tugendhat house. He loved leather, obviously, but he also loved floor to ceiling glass. And this is from that is International Modernism. This is on Langdale in Dallas. It's been published a lot. It's a great redo, but there's also a classicism to a lot of Mies van der Rohe's work. That's why sometimes modernism can borrow both from classical vocabulary and from the medieval vocabulary. Notice it is absolutely symmetric as you approach it. It has a colonnade that comes out to instead of columns, it has a steel vent that greets you with a cantilevered porch, but then floor to ceiling glass and banded windows. And this is actually for sale. I found this on realtor.com in Dallas right now for, I think, 2.2. I didn't write down the address. So the legacy of Mies van der Rohe is still current. Now, Dallas was very, very lucky with this architect. He was Columbia trained, and he came to Texas in the 30s because of the Depression to work here. And he took everything he learned about modernism, but applied it to a Texas vocabulary and a Texas climate. So instead of having the flat roof that you've seen on the other 3 examples, he actually does use very shallow pitched roofs. He used orange common brick, which is the most common brick to Texas, but he also always emphasized that horizontal line, whether it was in the windows, the balconies, or even in the brick. A lot of his houses have Roman brick. Now, from there, his name is Howard Meyer. He's most famous for Temple Emmanuel in Dallas at the corner of Hillcrest and Preston Road. Unfortunately, 3 of his houses have been torn down in the last 2 years, including one that I worked on at one point in my life. I was very lucky when I was just out of grad school. I got to work on Ray Nasher's house. Okay, there's one other aspect that comes out during this time also, and this is based on that modern architect borrowing from the classical vocabulary, and that is new formalism. This is a completely symmetric modern house, contemporary house. It is by Philip Johnson, Thanksgiving Square to AT&T in New York, one of the most prolific architects in the world, also, sometimes called by most architectural historians a gadfly, but he could afford to be. The story is the reason he could afford to practice architecture for as long as he did is he inherited half of Alcoa aluminum from his father. But this house was done for Henry C. Beck. Henry C. Beck married into one of the wealthiest families in Dallas, and he built a new house as he is tearing down his father's old house. This is also new formalism, and this is done by Edward Burrell Stone. This is the Bruno Graff house on Park Lane.
The what house?
Bruno Graff, Graff. It is a brise soleil around the entire second floor. Brise soleil is a sunscreen. It allows light and air to pass through, but it filters the harsh sunlight. And then the ground floor is all formal. The bedrooms are on the second floor. Now, Edward Durrell Stone, if you want to know what else he did, it's like the Kennedy Center in Washington. He's a major architect. I also got to see one of his buildings I did in a city called Bobbin Cook on the Croatian coast. He just repeats himself constantly, but he loves his vocabulary. That Brisole is executed in white terrazzo. This was one of the most expensive houses built in 1962 in Dallas. But we move from very simple now to contemporary. And this is subtype MCM, mid-century modern. MCM is really a subtype of contemporary, but notice floor ceiling glass, horizontal line, low pitch roof, if any roof at all, and you just have this asymmetric front. This is a reconstructed Dilbeck. It was being completely rebuilt, fire hit, destroyed it during construction, and they rebuilt it from the original drawings. But this is off of Inwood Road. Asymmetric, very definitely MCM. The only Dilbeck only did 3 MCM houses in his entire career before he died. This is a much more common style in Dallas. This is based on the work of California called Eichler. It has the front-facing gable, and the key characteristics of it is that this gable always will be glazed. Almost every house of this period, that will be glass, even if from there down it is a solid. It also has a carport instead of an attached garage, doorways that go through it, and so you have the convenience of parking in the carport and then going into the house. This is in Highland Park. This is the Sanders house, and it has all those characteristics. Solid wall, glass gable, a little bit of a solid wall with another glass gable with the garage all the way across the front. And it gets, again, used again. And it gets stripped down to this ultimately. Now we're going to deal with ranches real quickly. Ranch is about form over style. Ranch house does not describe a style the way we use it today. At one time it did. When Cliff May in California started building ranches, they were based on the Spanish hacienda. And they had all those tactile materials of 19th century Spanish housing. By the time it gets across the country, it's not. It's about geometry. And key character finding features are going to be the roof will be hipped. It'll be low to the ground. It'll be about hugging the earth as much as possible. And then they will always be asymmetric. And another ranch, and even this one's asymmetric. If you look at this wing versus this wing. And of course, the ranch is biting dust, literally. I mean, unfortunately, the ranches were built on really large lots because they spread out across space. And so ultimately that leads to this part of the discussion. We no longer politically correctly use the word McMansion. We try now to call it something else. I'll get to that in a minute. But McMansion is all about size. And this quote is an abstraction from Virginia McAllister's book. It's any house deemed to be either oversized in comparison with adjacent homes or disjointed in style. But it's about size. Most of the ranch houses in North Dallas were 2,000 square feet, 2,300 square feet. They're being replaced by 5,000 to 10,000 square foot houses. They will always be 2-story because of the cost of the lot. The extra materials are going to be extremely thin instead of intrinsic. You'll see thin brick, you'll see stone veneer, you'll see precast concrete done as stone. And they will borrow from every style necessary to achieve the form. That did sound a little pejorative, didn't it? Okay, but the correct term for McMansion is millennial mansion or millennium mansion. This is how we're trying to not, use McMansion anymore. But the character defining features again is complex high-pitched roofs, usually a 2-story entry, arches at the entry or somewhere. Usually dormers and multiple cladding materials and different styles and shapes and sizes of windows, just the front type of window styles. So we have this, everything from the turret, multiple materials, multiple window types, definitely a lot of high-pitched, multiple types of roof. This is actually a slide I found online that actually explained it. I won't tell you what site, but anyway, it's not a good site. Smooth turret, but then faceted turrets here. But again, everything we talked about, arched at the entry, some type of applied material and different size windows everywhere with dormers.
Goofy cascading window scheme.
I'm sorry,
Said goofy cascading window scheme.
I was going to skip over that as quickly
Yeah.
as possible. Well, the website this came from is actually lists the 16 worst houses in Texas.
Oh. Now, I would assume, just looking at that, not any more knowledgeable than I am, I would assume that's a staircase.
It is,
But
It is.
it is cascading
Yeah.
because it is following.
and you're absolutely right. And it was done in Spanish Revival architecture, sometimes in Dallas too. So that's why I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on Goofy. It is odd today to do that.
Okay.
Also, a house this size, as an architect, I always put 2 staircases in for safety reasons instead of 1. Okay, but this is where I think architecture may be moving. This house is in Dallas in Preston Hollow. It was just built a year and a half ago. It is, for an architect, rather spectacular. It's done by a really good architect who used to teach at UT Austin. It's new brutalism, and I'm not going to show you the origins of brutalism, but basically brutalism is about cast in place concrete. Just think of it that way. It actually comes from a French word for concrete. And so the formwork is expressed, but the forms are simple. This is where modern architecture may be going, because the last 3 years, and even on the website that I was on for another client recently, architects are beginning to use cast in place concrete in the most brutal form again, not trying to make it look like Louis Kahn with absolutely smooth finishes, which I still love, as opposed to more like IMK, where you actually express the formwork. So how to determine style? You always start with the walls, the roof, and then you add the definitions of architectural detail. And I'm going to close with this. This is something I heard him say one time at a lecture. He didn't write it. I tried finding it. It's not in any of his books. He's written, Vincent Scully is one of the most important architectural historians of all time. He's written over 20 books. He was at Yale for 35 years. His architectural history class at Yale used to be standing room only. I mean, was a significant figure. But at one time in a talk, he said all architecture is an illiterate copy of illiterate copies of illiterate copies. Hopefully you've seen the best of the illiterate copies today. So, yes.
In the, doesn't matter what style the outside of the house is, we walk inside with the clients. Is there a rule of thumb that says this style of house should have this kind of an interior? Or it should look like this, or it should have these kind of materials?
You have to take a class I teach at PD. Actually, I do teach history of interior design at PD. Yes and no. There's actually kind of not anymore. Think about interior design in 1960. If you were in Architectural Digest in 1960 as a designer, as an architect, you would do a room in Louis XVI, and it would be your French room. You do a French room today and people would laugh, because everything is about mixing and it's about being eclectic. The house I showed you on Swiss that we won the award for, there's one piece of furniture from every decade of the 20th century. In the living room of a 1913 house, we placed a pair of 1980 Vladimir Kagan sofas. Vladimir Kagan is kind of kidney-shaped sofa. Absolute contemporary statement that almost everybody's using, unfortunately, this year. But the whole point is, yes, there should be certain things, but when we did the house in Swiss, we restored all the 1913 cabinet work. So you have I think if you have the integrity of the shell, you can do anything you want with the movable parts of the interior. And I think that's what is so hard for some clients. I have a client that I did a house for a client. His cousin was relocating from California to Dallas. He called me and said, would you look at this house for me? I did, and the house was okay. There's nothing special about it, but he was in love with it. And I walked through it a second time with him, and I realized he wasn't looking at the house. He was looking at the art. It belonged to an art dealer. The art on the wall was 10 times better than the house. So you can do the same with the interior. The hardest thing I ever have with clients is to not have them look at the superficial, but look at the bones. One of the houses I did on Swiss Avenue had not been redecorated. I know history belonged to a judge in Dallas at one point. It had not been redecorated since 1968, the year that Richard Nixon was elected. It was not pleasant. The bones were good. I mean, the master bathroom in this house, you walked in and it had been done in black faux marble with white Greek columns, and they had walled over 11 of the 12 windows in the bathroom.
Oh my goodness.
There was one window in the bathroom. My clients didn't even know that there were 11 other windows. But I took them outside and showed them from the outside where the windows were, because they were still there. They were behind the sheetrock. So the first thing we did was open that up, and of course, you get rid of black faux marble as quickly as you can, almost as quickly as you get rid of white faux marble, because it's yellow now. And you just have to get a client to look past the superficial and look at the bones. Think about how you walk through the house. I mean, it's actually a realtor taught me the best thing of all, and that is always have, what is the flow of the house? And that is when you walk into a house, it should be a nice, clean flow. You shouldn't have rooms that are so awkward to get to that you have to walk through another room. So I think that's the hardest thing that I have, is sometimes getting clients on historic houses to look past the superficial and look for the bones. Yes.
Tell us what PD stands for.
Oh, PD, in case I didn't explain it, is Preservation Dallas. I have served on their board at times. I have been involved with them through 3 of their last directors, which current one is there now for 16 years. It's an organization that promotes the quality of keeping historic structures within the city of Dallas. And they do have a counterpart now. There is a Preservation Park Cities, and there is also Old Little Cliff Conservation League, but PD is umbrella over kind of those two also in some ways. They do educational programs. They do in-town outings. They provided the slide for me on the timeline today. They're also a great resource. Actually, they have rededicated their library as the Virginia McAllister Library, part of her library collection. Her library collection was so large. I took 1 box of books. SMU took something like 24 cases of books, and PD took something like 10 cases of books. Her library was bigger than most public libraries on one subject, architecture in urban neighborhoods. So, they have the Virginia McAllister Library that's open to you. You can go down there and research areas of style, areas of construction, histories of Dallas, like on Swiss Avenue. My history teacher in graduate school actually had 3 students do as their thesis sections of Swiss Avenue in history. So there's a great documentation of what owner owned what house. It's not always complete, like the house I showed you. I know that my client was the 13th owner, but we can find the name of the contractor. Nobody can find the name of the architect that designed the house, which is unusual because it's not on the building permit. It's not, there are no drawings. We know that actually, since I redid it this time, the water damage in that house was so extensive that the final insurance claim was somewhere over $2 million restoring it. But we restored all the historic materials and the historic woodwork, et cetera. And that included their living expenses because the house could not be occupied for 2 years. The nice thing about it was we also got to do full abatement. So it's a 1913 house with no lead paint on the inside and no asbestos on the inside. And an insurance company paid for it, $67,000 of abatement on that house. But we also, because of that, got to find out that the first owners who owned a department store in Dallas made changes while it was under construction. They enlarged doorways, they changed a hallway, and they also eliminated the back door and moved it. I mean, it was really strange. Even without original drawings, we could begin, when you strip a house that far down, you begin to figure out, oh, that's where the back door used to be. So anyway, I think we're probably, we're way past time. So any other questions? And now I'm going to sit down and be quiet.
What's your favorite style of work? And if you had clients that build me your favorite house, what would you build?
Question.
Well, I live in a 1925 Craftsman. Would I do it at this point in my life? No. Actually, I'm more excited right now. Probably, I've now been doing this for over 40 years. I'm actually really excited by a project I just started. It's a 1957 mid-century modern, but it was done by a man. It was designed by a man who built it. He studied architecture, but never practiced. So it had some interesting features to it, but he also did a horrible 1970s addition to it that just basically screwed up part of the back of the house. But my clients are very young. He's a retired actor and she's has an MFA, so they're very art oriented. I also collect art. And so what we're doing in that case is we're adding 1,000 square feet to the house and we're completely making the back of the house glass. And it is actually one of the most fun projects I've taken on in quite a while. So, and right now, one of my clients on Swiss is thinking about relocating to Austin. And thank God they don't want to do another historic house. They want to do a contemporary house. I think architects don't thrive on necessarily one style because we get to see everything. I think what makes my life so interesting is that we get to do a little bit of everything. So, but right now, MC Young is kind of an interesting place to be. If I was doing a house for myself, I found a 70s contemporary I want. It's had one owner since it was built in 1970. It has blue tarps on 3 parts of the roof. I know that it leaks like a sieve. When it rains, the inside windows fog, but it faces a creek. Yeah. Thank you all very much. You've been very long.
That was amazing. So I would tell you about luxury is that you don't have to be rich to do luxury. You just have to be willing to learn. And this is a good example. Knowing architecture, knowing what finishes to expect in a home when you're showing a luxury property. You need to know what to expect for that price point, be able to speak to it. If you're selling in Dallas, you need to understand private schools. Did you know that Doug Matsky toured every private school in Dallas 6 years ago so that he could speak to that? You need to understand the golf clubs. Most wealthy people are going to be members, understand what memberships entail, what the golf course is. There's like Club Corp, understand where they share memberships and that kind of thing. And then also understand how wealthy people buy, hold, and move their wealth. You don't have to have wealth, just understand how they take possession, how they spend their money, and then be that trusted financial advisor to them. My luxury relationships are very transactional. We're not best friends, but they'll call me again in 10 years. Just like if your lawyer got you off a murder charge and you got charged again in 10 later, you're not going to go, well, that lawyer never stayed in touch with me. So you do a good job. You become part of their inner circle, and that's kind of your goal. So luckily at Keller Williams, if you're not in luxury, our goal is to get you in luxury. We're not a secluded, sequestered group and we don't want new members. We want to create a path to luxury for everyone by doing things like this, but also being available to let you know. So currently, to be part of what's considered the luxury group, you have to have had 4 luxury transactions for our market center. It's about $750 and up. So once you've done that, you're considered luxury. But we definitely want to be more inclusive than exclusive. So and one thing that has changed in luxury that you should know is if you've never sold a luxury home and you get a luxury listing, we have a couple of signs to borrow. We want our luxury sign in front of your property. We want you to use the luxury materials and the logo for that listing because it makes sense because we're out there with KW Luxury in front of more yards, and that helps us with market share. We're actually the top luxury seller in Plano, but you don't necessarily know it because we don't have a consistent signage like Ebby Global Property and that kind of thing. So that's kind of how you join luxury, and there's a lot of great materials that we can use. I was trying to see if there's anything else I wanted to mention. A couple things that when I took Champions with Randy, don't you guys have Randy at Champions?
Yes.
He used to always say, don't dress for where you're going, dress for who you are going to run into, who you might run into, because your early opportunities in luxury are actually probably going to come from other agents. Mine did, Doug's did, yours probably did. So you need to ingratiate yourself with other luxury agents to start with. You're not going to email an agent and say, hey, can I hold your new luxury listing open? You have to be faithful in those little things. Like Holly I would call her in a heartbeat to buy an open house because she does a good job. She adds value for my seller. So one of your best ways into luxury is to help serve your current luxury agents. And I highly believe that. And that's I'm looking around the room at the luxury agents. That's how we all did it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be anything special. You just have to be willing to learn, have a motivation. And I used to tell myself, why not me? And number two, hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. There is a space for you to take somebody else's luxury listing. If they become complacent, they don't work as hard as you, they don't do as much. And the other thing I would just say is define your level of service. And if you have a $250,000 listing, treat them like a luxury client. Last year, I had someone that came into my open house, asked me to sell their daughter's house, like $650,000, asked me to help their daughter buy a house. And all of a sudden, we're looking at 3.5s for them. They decided I was a hard worker. And I've helped them buy 3.5. We sold their 1.2. So assume everyone knows someone and that everyone's your gateway into luxury, and to find that level of service. So I get a $300,000 listing, it gets staged, it gets luxury marketing. So just, that was,
Fourth homes.
yeah, Doug's done 4 transactions, 1 family. So that's just a little piece of advice. Does anybody have any questions about luxury that's not already in the division?
Can we do a class where we describe the interior features of luxury homes?
That would be awesome, because she
was actually
touched
gonna
on
do
it.
that.
Knowing your, like, what are your plumbing features? What are your, certainly countertops? What type of flooring is luxury? You could probably lead that all by yourself, but just understanding, like, I was in Starwood last year, we see back-to-back houses. You're able to walk in and go, okay, that last house, just so you know, there's $100,000 difference in this appliance package. This is Thermador Viking.
Right.
The other house had Gen Air. And it's shocking, but it's your job to point that out. Sometimes buyers have new money. They do not know. And it's our job to educate them about the finishes of the house. And this is why this one's more, and this is why it's worth it, right? So I'd love to do that. You can,
Comment time.
yeah, and I know we're getting an appliance.
We're getting the chef from Sub-Zero, the sous chef the executive chef from Sub-Zero to talk about, he's free range now. He's gone to an independent dealer, so he can talk about Le Cornu or Ago or Viking or Sub-Zero. So that's a very entertaining presentation you'll want to attend. And we're getting marble as a luxury finish out in kitchens, because you're seeing it a lot, but there are ways to make sure that it's not destroyed by everyday cooking. And that's from a stone purveyor that uses a sentiment to choose your slabs rather than making you walk a warehouse. So you'll want to show up for both of those because they're game changers.
So, and then I would just encourage, go to luxury open houses, ask the realtors questions. If, you know, that's how you learn, by being in, asking questions, feel the difference. Go to a 400, then go to a 1 million, and then start noticing the quality of constructions, the baseboards. Cynthia let me know that we're not doing shoe molding anymore. We've got to make that hardwood go right up to the 7-inch baseboard. And so, and of course, keeping abreast of the trends. Cynthia and I have a fun relationship because I can't stand the new trends. So she's always showing me all this awesome stuff. I'm going, but it's important to know what it is. So you walk into a house that everything in the room is green and.
Well, just even like you were talking about earlier, and I apologize, that's a phone call I've been waiting from DR Horton for 3 months to help a client. He finally called me back. I had to get it, but just like her and I were talking about, just the words, like you said, being able to use those words that your clients have no idea. And they're like, oh, she's really smart. She knows her stuff.
Yeah.
You know, I mean.
And it's about being smart. It's not about being, what's the word?
Pretentious?
Pretentious.
Yes,
Thank you.
no.
Most of my clients don't like pretentious. They like smart. They want to treat you like a trusted advisor. They want to give you their house and trust you to take care of it, just like their financial person takes care of their money. And it's just a very much, I trust you now. And winning that trust takes what you said, which is knowing the language, impressing them, you know, selling yourself so that you get a full commission and it's not argued over. Like some of you luxury agents, we don't have to argue that much anymore about our commission, right?
No.
Because they see a value coming in. So thank you for that alarm.
Is that your Tom?
That's it. Any other questions? And thank you. That was amazing. That you teach and learn more.
Well, the whole program, I mean, I'm not the only one. PD has a program.
We only want you.
The whole day. Well, the funny thing is I've actually taught 4 different classes at PD, but I don't want to teach 4 classes.
Yeah, well, we would love to know that and it's very avail our agents of that opportunity that we can learn more and.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Well, just, I will.
That's right, gotta go. Nice to meet you.
See you again.
Thank you very much, thanks for. Technically didn't enter. I can work. If I have that problem, I would believe you.
First of all, nobody likes rain.
If my client does have a problem, I'm calling you. How long was the house still built before it started happening?
They all put their, so what I do with the DR, they get a year, right? They get a year.
Actually.
But then they have to fix everything. So I always tell them, listen, don't do
Give it a month. Oh, yeah, I do that every time, yeah.
Yeah, I usually.
I know exactly.
The
one
The trailer homes, 6 trailer homes, nothing. I can't get rid of this fact I've had for months.
I offer today half service.
Okay.
Oh, it's yours. It's mine. Okay. And I've been trying to figure
I'm gonna sell for cash, dude.
I know. But his parents, they're huge ones.
Yeah.
9 deals.
Holy shit.
And so. They're married, so then I was never get a phone call back until. He goes, it will be taken care of, tell them.
It's so like your faith promise to yourself.
Well, that's good for me to hear.
take them out.
I mean, are you? There's a lot of issues.
The bottom line is, like,
It's like, it's just so easy. You just-
That's why I love it.
That's a very simple group.
You're outliers, you're a science friend, I love her.
If you have one, I need a happy hour, lunch, coffee, office, anything.
I work 3 minutes down.
Okay.
Yeah, so I also. Me too.
I want to just. I don't, I'm not doing that much lately because there's no reason to. Because everybody's had somebody volunteer. Kind of thing. But yeah, when it goes back to. She's not as aggressive as she learns the house. I like the gray area. I can even fight. Well, yeah, normal, and that's how I own it. From that conversation we had, that's what I teach. I'm like, handful of us is what it's like now, but it's not always gonna be this way. So when it's not this way, this is what you need to do, and this is how you actually do it, and you go out and pre-code, you go, I'm gonna present your improvement listed in the neighborhood. Go show all the homes in the neighborhood, I'm gonna present all that kind of stuff, so that's why I teach.
Yeah.
I'm a little more aggressive.
And I'm.
Very good. Very similar personality. Everybody like. We're strong.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't actually discussed. I'll come up with enough to say,
But
doing a job that requires us.
okay, things to do. Or call them, make an appointment.
Can't go wrong. Shit. But that's what I think, like, so like the high, I walked over to the at the client fair. I love our business stuff. Actually, you know, it's not really. No, I have one fire.
email me and I will get you the information.
I mean, it's a
Vision.
it's just, it's a house with.
Texas history. And they also have the original permit books.
Oh, wonderful.
The problem is for you, do research on 1957, you can't get into it right now because of COVID. That building is closed.
She took the
Oh, by the way.
telling us that she took all the really top tier people.
Also.
She keeps saying.
Go to the.
Yeah.
I'm not, and that's why clients like I have right now. One of my clients. But
You're a good buffer.
Message me, she's like,
But I
"Sir,
have, like,
I just want to get him, you gotta, I told him, she's
just
calling them.
Those
Yeah, I know, exactly.
Like standing up.
You did fine.
Like everything, this man loves me, we've gone out multiple times. She's very articulate. Like, he won't give us like, this other one, next month I close on new building. But wait, this guy, this one was from an house.
Yeah.
No, and this guy, this is my third transaction.
So I appreciate all the you share.
I was like, I really got another one. I've got the in-laws, I've got everybody.
Trying to cover it up, you know?
All in the most advanced
I tell him off, like, once a month probably, I'm like, I'm so far, and that one, so I give him one. And I swear to God, we're another contract for an investment property. We're not. And so, then he referred me to everybody else.
Also find out who planted it.
No, I do. You guys are so thorough compared to some, but it makes sense. So I know that.
I only do that because my first homeowner's association. It's 6 months. Still my friend.
But they point out inside.
Vocabulary.
Yeah.
We'll do vocabulary. Because you know, everybody comes to me, I should do this. I love this.
So it doesn't work.
I love this. And you cannot say.
Well, the other way to date a house also.
You have to say, you have to get excited for a brief second.
They told me.
See something that really enhances. And then you're on.
1957, it'll have like 1956 or 57 stamped.
You teach class.
Well, occasionally, I don't like the way.
Just Stephanie, did you want to know such a dish?
Reservation balance and something like that.
There you go.
Great.
Or after later for 10.
Because if you know me.
Yeah, I can't wish you to come, but
What part of
she
town?
says so much.
My mother actually grew up. My great, actually on my mother's side of the family, my mother's family moved to Dallas in the 1860s. And at that point, they had, when she died, my great grandmother died.
I don't rejoice now,
They had
but.
2 houses on a street that no longer exist because the town was serviced by the Central Expressway.
Okay. That's amazing.
But I grew up.
Do you
I know, that's what I'm saying. I really would like to transition.
consultation?
Shower?
Yes.
Okay, thank you again.
Email me is always
Email you and
easiest
ask
way.
you.
I'll get you the information.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I will get the presentation.
I'll Cynthia, I'll make a copy.
What you gonna do?
I'll give you a copy of this at some point.
Awesome.
That would be great.
Well, that would be.
I
Amazing.
think it's gonna be.
Thank
you so much.
When we ran through it on 45 minutes.
It's the questions.
They were good questions. Well, they made me force.
I'll figure out how to do exactly.
It's like the first time over there. So I'll figure out how to get it together.
Every so often. And then I can go. The rest of the time, and they love me. They're like, I'm gonna bring them. And they're in the late night.
Thank you for coming. You guys are more often. Yes.
If it was a new person on stage, I was like,
You know, if it's successful in real estate.
This is summer and I've been one of those.
I do things that are bad as like you're maybe get fun bad, that's.
This was fun.
You're free to go. I won't brag on you. That's what you had to the rest.
Oh, and I'll get you.
Awesome.
There's other things.
Oh, I agree.
Okay, so. It was nice meeting
Job,
you.
Darryl.
Well, thank you. Talk to you soon.
Could be better.
Thanks again. So
Thank you very much. Goodness, coming to,
So I saw it.
when did you come into this?
You ready for tax? So,
You know, Bob Baker's after surgery, but
yes.
he'll be coming in about a month, so it's gonna be quite a while.
I understand.
Paying attention, I wanna go to her again, it's been probably 3 years.
She bailed hospital.
Yes.
You gotta run, you gotta go, and that's why I mean.
We do some volume.
Yeah, we took one recently together. Well, if you guys.
So.
Yes.
I've used
I
that.
got tutored and so I live in Woodland. And I got craftsmen, and I can identify this. But see, like words, we were talking about, like, I use the word. Now, because I trademark.
There's a ton of transactions.
You were spelling the coining.
I
I know what coining is, but in my head, I don't hear the word use, so I was thinking.
Come back as quicker as well.
But you can put that in the MOA. So, no,
I'm glad to hear it. We need to.
No, because that's what I was asking. I was asking. Yeah, you sound smart, but I pulled it up, like, because I was asking her, I go, so I was.
She's probably somebody
She
like
does
that.
always.
Very nice.
And you can add the rest. Like, I wouldn't put colonial without also the traditional, you've got to check on traditional no matter what, because some people have that as a search thing and they only have traditional. So, yeah, you can't be taken out of that. It's gotta have that, and you can have this.
Whoever's searching.
You have to, and, if somebody has basics in there, they have traditional. And they mean they're looking for anything in this area.
Went through the roof. In that particular year. But I
And
gotta meet with this gentleman. That particular year I did 3 million,
then my.
just in real estate sales and another.
Castle.
100.
Oh, yeah, the castle.
Series 9 net income.
That's
crazy.
Thanks for asking.
Well, I'm glad you know you're doing well. Thank you.
You'll be doing what too.
It was a couple $1 million, went to go list a house, and I was like, I told Shelley at the time, I go, hey, can we add a number to see if she was for this? And she actually wrote, I emailed it to her, and she goes, oh my God, that was awesome, you wrote that perfect, so that's awesome. I love her.
How are you?
Okay, so I'm gonna go to your office or mine? For the couple.
I met you at a house in Dallas, what was that house that has all the designers?
Yeah.
Kim's back.
Thank you.
I met you there.
Thank you.
100%. Yeah. Using those words, it just means something.
Just said right there.
Hey, Diane.
Yes, ma'am.
I just turned on the light and he just got one on top. But just let me know when it's gonna be empty. It's gonna be empty. We get tired of waiting over there.
Hello. Pardon? You're already here?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well then come on, are you?
Oh, did you? One of those days.
Yeah.
I know how that feels. Okay, so you quit working.
I got it. Yes.
Okay, so we were gonna put the couch right here.
Right here. Okay.
Are we not? Yeah, we're gonna put that.
Yeah, the 22nd is Tuesday. And then nothing's Tuesday till Tuesday. Okay.
It's what I think she's trying to do.
And I'm gonna just, if she does that, then I'll just write her back. from that. How far is that drive? Well, it looks like about 3 hours. No, no. Oh my God. It's harder to fly into, Knoxville because my son was driving. So it's closer, it's only an hour to go to Knoxville, but harder. It's just harder. Yes. It is warm already. And then this is gonna go down there. Yes, sir. So they said we could do that later. Yeah, that'd be fantastic. Thank you.